Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I commend this bill to the House.
I'm advised that call 11 won't be a split call. It's going entirely to the Greens.
Mr. Speaker.
It's not going to the Greens now. So, Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very much my pleasure to take a call on this Riccarton-Bush Amendment Bill, second reading. And during the dinner break, I had the pleasure of going to hear a angel investor talking about his work in the city, and it was very interesting to hear about him listening to 300 or so people coming up with business ideas and filtering it down to 20 that they'd look at very carefully and actually investing in 3 and 4. And it was very encouraging to me to hear so much entrepreneurial activity going on here in Wellington and in New Zealand, and it's highly relevant to the issue of Riccarton's bush, because fundamentally here we are celebrating the protection of a fine stand of kaiakatea and bush in Christchurch. But the foundations of it, of course, lie on the success of the Deans brothers and the Deans family, who came to New Zealand in the 1840s from a little village called Riccarton in East Ayrshire in Scotland, and were entrepreneurs. And that is what this country has been based on. People going out to the other side of the world, taking on enormous risks in order to create the wealth that we in New Zealand enjoy. And so they had to navigate their way past floods, disease, fire, sharp depressions, wars, diseases of their own body and mind, and also of the sheep and the cattle. And back in the 1840s, 50s and 60s, in order to build the great sheep stations that the Deans owned and which provided the wealth from which they were able to hold on to and preserve this Riccarton bush, which this piece of legislation seeks to continue to preserve as it has. And so when we look at that question of entrepreneurship, which has been so central to the history of New Zealand and the formation of our economy, what do we look at? What do entrepreneurs like to have in their environment? What do they need for a supportive environment? And you start running through the list of things. It's a good sound rule of law, one of the great inheritances we had from the system of government that came to New Zealand through the United Kingdom. They need access to capital, and a lot of them brought that. There are few carefully saved gold sovereigns in order to buy the sheep and the land and to survive the years when it took a long time to convert these sheep stations into places that were productive and get through the many depressions. A very sharp depression there was, Mr. Speaker, in the 1850s. So they needed access to capital, as they do indeed today. But they also needed and relied upon sound money. There weren't politicians around back then who were trying to water the milk and somehow think that this was going to create wealth in the country by debasing the currency. No, they were relying on sound money, the gold standard back in the 19th century. They were relying on access to resources, because they had the ability to go out there and there was a clear understanding that New Zealand here was a relatively empty wilderness. There were maybe 100,000 Maori living across the whole of New Zealand at that time, maybe 1,000 or 2 living in the South Island. So there was a very large area waiting for. I read my history books, Mr. Peters. It's true that you may feature in the history books, but I read my history books, and you've been around for a very long time, and it's probably not unfair that we should celebrate such a long and extended career in the House this evening. But perhaps it's come towards the end of its usefulness. I'm not sure. That's not for me to comment. But when we focus on the access to resources that were so essential to the formation of the wealth that is the foundation of our economy, then we're looking at that access to rules. And then I suppose another issue is access to skilled workers who can work out on the field. And that was so important to how the Deans built their stations and created their wealth. And funnily enough, when you run through all those sorts of things, rule of law, access to capital, sound money that isn't being watered down by tyrannical politicians, access to resources, workforces, those are just the sorts of things that this government has been promoting and proposing in its business growth agenda, and which underlines the most of the activity of this government in the economic growth area, and which underlines the strength that we have here and the ability for us to keep on doing what we're doing. So now I'd just like to draw now at this point of the speech towards the Riccarton-Bush Amendment Bill itself, where we look at the objects of this being the Christchurch City Council's promoted bill, which is all about modernising and updating the governance arrangements for the board known as the Riccarton-Bush Trustees, and in order to better define the board's functions, to provide for the continuation of its work and to enhance its finance and administration. And you're just jealous I've never written anything about you. That's the land at 30 Kahu Road, Christchurch. Oh, that's true, in the board. Well, you know, I mean, I write about interesting people who've achieved things. Yes, that's right. And if we drill down further to some of the things, I just wanted to draw attention to some of the work that the Select Committee did, and the Local Government and Environment Committee received and considered 2 submissions. I remember it very well. At Antarctica, New Zealand, we listened to the submissions, and it recommended that the bill be passed with amendments. And on that matter, I'd just like to continue just to say that I very much recommend this bill to the House and congratulate the MP, Jerry Brownlee, for his fine work in bringing this bill to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it.